All right, great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to everybody here tonight. Uh, so, um, as John said, my name is Kiley Briggs. I'm the Director of Conservation for the Orianne Society. Tonight, I'll be talking to you about wood and spotted turtles, two species that have a very special place in my heart, and hopefully by the end of tonight, everyone else here as well. And before I get into that, I do want to just introduce the Orianne Society very briefly. So, again, we're a nonprofit organization. Our focus is on conserving critical habitat for rare reptiles and amphibians. And even though I'm here in the Northeast working on these turtle conservation projects, the bulk of our work is actually down in the southeastern United States. And a lot of that is focused around this species, the eastern indigo snake. They're the largest snake native to North America. Um, their populations have really taken a hit in the last century, and it's really impossible to think about indigo snake conservation without thinking about this animal, the gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoises are what we call a keystone species that construct habitat critical for many other animals. They dig really deep burrows that hundreds of other species use for one reason or another. Dozens of those species depend on the gopher tortoise, but due to changes in the landscape, especially clearing of longleaf pine forests and stopping natural forest fires, those natural forest fires keep the brush and understory open. And when the fire disappears, vegetation gets too dense, it forces the tortoise out, and once the tortoise leaves, many other species decline as well. And you can't have indigo snakes in much of the southeast without the gopher tortoise, which is why a lot of our work in the southeast is focused on restoring fire to the ecosystem by conducting prescribed burns, largely on private land, but government properties as well. But I'm not going to talk about any of that for the rest of this evening. It's just really setting the stage and the context for the type of work that the Orianne Society does. That work in the Southeast, that's part of what we call the Longleaf Savannas Initiative. In the Northeast, we have a couple different conservation programs, and our newest, which we kicked off last year, is the Hudson Berkshire Turtle Conservation Program, which is what brought me to your area last year. So needing to draw some arbitrary lines on a map, what we're calling the Hudson Berkshire region is this area on red in southeastern New York, northern New Jersey, southwestern Mass, western Connecticut. And in this area, we have a few different species of turtles that we have a particular interest in, and I'll introduce those in a moment. But why the Hudson Valley and the surrounding landscape? What makes this area special for turtles? Why aren't we doing this work somewhere else? So in the Hudson Valley, you have over 10 species of turtle that you share the landscape with. There are 4 that we are interested in. These are all closely related to each other. And they share many characteristics that put them at risk and mean that they have a greater level of conservation concern. The Blandings turtle, the wood turtle, the spotted turtle, and the bog turtle. At this point in time, the bog turtle is the only one on this list that is federally endangered, although the others have been petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And we should have news about the wood turtle very soon about whether or not they will be considered a threatened species federally. Hopefully in the next few months, we'll know where that's going. So where do these turtles all live in North America? These are all northeastern species. Blandings turtle is really Great Lakes region with some isolated remnant populations in northern New England and the Hudson drainage of New York. The wood turtle, it's most of the Northeast, also the Great Lakes region. Spotted turtle is really the East Coast, and then patchier distribution around the Great Lakes. And then the bog turtle has the smallest range of those species. Remnant populations isolated in just random spots in the Southeast. And then here in the Northeast, they're a little more widespread, but also just very, very hard to come by. But where do all of these ranges overlap? So what you're looking at here is just the darker the color, the more of these turtles live in the area. And this Hudson drainage, in particular, this specific location, this darker blob, that's the only spot in the entire world where all 4 of these species can be found in close proximity to each other. And to put things into context here, so the Roundout Valley, where I think the towns that each of these conservation commissions are part of, is this yellow circle here. Not quite in that 4 turtle territory. The limiting factor there really is Blanding's turtle, which we only know of from Dutchess County, but it is possible they could be elsewhere. And then the bog turtle, who knows? I'm not aware of any in your neck of the woods, but they have such a patchy distribution and small remnant populations that who knows, a population could be found here someday. Now, one caveat to the rest of this presentation is that what I really can't do tonight is talk about specifics from your area. And it's not because I haven't been there or don't know anything about the habitat in your area. It's because there's a thriving international black market for wood and spotted turtles, which is what this presentation will be focused on. And if I were to put up some maps of your area or show you where the good wood turtle sites are, that could attract unwanted attention, especially knowing that this presentation will be online on YouTube. Anyone could get that information, and once poachers learn where a spot is, that can cause irreversible, like permanent damage to these turtle populations. So I'll be keeping things fairly vague geographically tonight. So first, I'm going to introduce you to the spotted turtle. We haven't really started work with the species in the Hudson Berkshire Turtle Conservation Program yet. That's coming up, I think, in 2025. So most of tonight will be focused on wood turtles. That said, here's some requisite spotted turtle info. This is a really small turtle. They have a black shell with yellow spots. They sometimes have orange or yellow spots on the head and neck. The legs often are black with yellow spots as well, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can have a lot of orange on their legs. This is a good example of that. The belly, if you were to turn these turtles over, the center of the belly is either a yellow or orangish color, and then they have these black blotches around the edge. And those black markings on their belly, as well as the spot pattern on the top of their shell, functions almost like a fingerprint. It's a unique pattern that no other turtle will have. So if you can take good reference photos or make an illustration of the pattern, you can use that to identify individual turtles in the future. And this is full size for these turtles. They only get up to about 4 inches in length, a little bit more sometimes. The only North American turtle smaller than the spotted turtle is the bog turtle. So very, very tiny when you're comparing them to your other local turtles. Now, in New York, they're not threatened or endangered. They're considered a species of special concern. I think of them as being fairly uncommon, but in parts of New York, they can also be widespread. Lower Hudson Valley, for example, there are areas where these turtles seem to be doing pretty good. The downside, however, is that there isn't a lot of information from New York as a whole about where the critical habitat for spotted turtles is, how their populations are doing. There just hasn't been much monitoring or surveying effort dedicated to spotted turtles in the state of New York. Where might you find spotted turtles? What type of habitat do they live in? Like most other turtles, they're a fairly aquatic species, but not quite as aquatic as some of your more common local turtles like the painted turtle or the snapping turtle, which really only leave the water to lay their eggs or to sun themselves. Spotted turtles will move around a little bit from one wetland to another. The wetlands they do live in tend to have some things in common. There tend to be just lots of shallow water up to about 2 feet deep. And those shallow areas have a lot of emergent vegetation, plants growing out of the water. But beyond that, the type of wetland could vary quite a bit. They live in bogs, marshes, vernal pools, which are temporary wetlands, sometimes in upland environments that dry up during the summer, scrub shrub swamps, or heavily forested wetlands like red maple swamps would be a place that you might expect to find spotted turtles. And advance. One thing or one type of vegetation that these turtles are closely associated with is sphagnum moss. If I'm in a wetland and I see a lot of sphagnum moss, that cues me in that I should probably be keeping my eyes open for spotted turtles. That said, there are plenty of wetlands that have spotted turtles that don't have sphagnum moss. It's not something that they require, but for whatever reason, the types of wetlands that have sphagnum tend to be pretty good places for spotted turtles. So there is a connection there, just not an absolute requirement. And how do these turtles move about the landscape? They'll spend most of their lives in a fairly small area, upwards of about 10 acres, would be the high end of average for a spotted turtle home range. Females, however, may travel outside of that home range to lay their eggs. And they'll also spend a lot of time in the summer and spring traveling overland to get from one wetland to another. Vernal pools, for example, because they dry up during the summer and often don't have water during the winter. A spotted turtle can't live there year round. They can't overwinter there. But those vernal pools are great places for amphibians to lay their eggs, and amphibian eggs happen to be great food for spotted turtles. So if you find a spotted turtle on land, it is probably just on its way from point A to point B, one wetland to another. Their diet, spotted turtles are what we call an opportunistic omnivore. They eat a little bit of everything. Invertebrates, small fish, small crustaceans, those probably make up the bulk of their diet. They would scavenge any dead stuff they can find as well. They also eat some aquatic vegetation. And they only feed in water. This is a video of obviously not a turtle in the wild. This is a turtle that lives with me. I use him for educational programs, just chowing down on an earthworm. He's very slow at eating, so we're not going to watch this video all the way through. We'll just move on. He'll eat that worm eventually. So how do we survey for spotted turtles? As I said, New York, not a lot of survey effort dedicated to this species, and I think it'd be very important to know where are the highest priority habitats or water systems for spotted turtles. And the way that we usually do that would be by doing catch and release trapping. This actually isn't the right type of trap. This is how we used to do spotted turtle trapping. Now there's this new style of turtle trap. It's quite a bit smaller. I just couldn't find a photograph of one of those in use. It is catch and release trapping, and we would bait those traps with like cat food or something along those lines. And just get an inventory on how many turtles are we catching per hour of trapping effort, essentially. And this is something that we plan on starting up in the lower Hudson drainage and surrounding uplands, probably in the summer of 2025, although we may have some opportunities to get into that this year. Another method not on this list, something that I'm using in Vermont right now, is environmental DNA. We can actually take water samples and test that water to see if there's spotted turtle DNA in there. It's a method that has been used for fish and other turtles quite a bit in the last 10 years. Spotted turtles, it's been kind of tricky, but we just had our first positive results detecting spotted turtle DNA in some Vermont wetlands this past year, which is very exciting. And I'm going to shift gears to wood turtles now. There's plenty more that I could discuss about spotted turtles, but as I talk about wood turtles, a lot of this information, especially in regards to their threats, is going to overlap. These are things that are common among all four of those priority species: the wood, the spotted, bog, and Blanning's turtle. The wood turtle, however, how do we know we're looking at a wood turtle? These turtles have a black head, orange legs, a brown shell. Sometimes that shell will have yellow markings on it. And they get quite a bit bigger than a spotted turtle, up to about 9 inches in length. That would just be their shell, which is still quite a bit smaller than a full-grown snapping turtle. So we can consider them a medium-sized turtle. This is my textbook picture of a completely average wood turtle. Not nearly as vibrantly colored as the picture in the last slide, but the orange is still there. This turtle is getting fairly dark in coloration. The males tend to be a little darker than females. But this is, I think, just like the example of what your average wood turtle is going to look like. Sometimes their shells can be really brilliantly patterned. I think this is, without a doubt, the most vividly patterned and colored wood turtle shell I've ever found. And to make things even better, this turtle also had very bright, vivid orange skin on its legs. The downside is that she was not willing to come out of her shell, so I didn't get a picture of her with those bright orange legs next to her brightly yellow patterned shell. Like the spotted turtle, the wood turtle is also uncommon through much of New York, but also widespread. You can find them many places. Something I like, a way I like to think about wood turtles is that you could bump into a wood turtle almost anywhere, but you really expect not to. They're also a high priority species of conservation need, listed as one of special concern in the state of New York. Throughout their entire range, we probably have about half as many wood turtles now as we did a century ago. And this is, as I said, a species for a candidate species for listing under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And there should be a decision on that sometime in the next few months. Now, their habitat. This is what really sets a wood turtle apart from any other turtle that you have in the Hudson drainage. They're a river valley specialist, and they overwinter in valley streams. You won't find them overwintering in ponds, lakes, wetlands, the sorts of places where you might find painted turtles or snapping turtles in abundance. They need that flowing water, and that water should be fairly clean as well. During the winter, they'll hibernate in any place that can give them structure and protection from strong currents and from predators. So wedged into a log jam, under a beaver dam, tucked into an undercut bank, or just at the bottom of a pool, or hiding in a leaf pack in the stream. During the summer, however, they're really more of a land turtle, and they can travel upwards of 1,000 feet from water, and they might spend weeks or months on end out of the water during the summer. During that time, they're more of a habitat generalist. You could find them anywhere: upland forests, floodplains, agricultural fields, wetlands, lakes, even, you name it. If it's within 1,000 feet of a stream that they overwinter in, that is habitat they could be using during the summer. So they don't live in just any old stream. Valley streams have some characteristics that stick out like a sore thumb in a map. The best sites for wood turtles tend to be these meandering streams that twist and turn and have a lot of like S curves. These rivers move around a lot, meaning that over time, they'll carve new channels, and parts of the river that once were stream get cut off. That leaves behind these wetlands called oxbows. Places like this are the sorts of places that I would go and look for wood turtles. You can find them plenty of other places, but this is your textbook, picture perfect wood turtle habitat, with some concerns. There's a lot of farming activity here in the floodplain that we'll talk about more in a moment. How is a wood turtle going to use the landscape around that stream? So the blue line here, that shows a 300-foot zone around the river. The yellow is about 1,000 feet. They'll spend most of their time in the floodplain in that 300-feet zone. Some of them will travel quite a bit farther. But if I'm just making up numbers here, I would say 90% of these turtles will spend 95% of the time within that 1,000-feet zone, but even more so within 300 feet. But there are occasional turtles, the outliers, that will travel much farther, either up or downstream or just away from water. Throughout the year, they're using the landscape quite a bit differently. So winter, they're in the streams. They'll wake up and come out pretty much as soon as the snow melts, and we get those first few days of 45-degree and sunny weather. That is typically going to be sometime in April. In Vermont, sometimes it's often like early May, but Lower Hudson Valley, I think sometime in April. During that April-May window, they stay close to the streams. If there's a risk of frost, they need to get back to the water, so they won't travel too far from the stream. Lay their eggs in June, and by the time July rolls around, they scatter. They're no longer near the rivers, or at least most of them aren't. And this is their foraging season, when they're using any and all habitat available to them in or close to the floodplain. But then late September, early October, they come back to the streams, spend some time in the floodplain. But then as we start getting more and more of those frosty nights, they eventually stop spending time on land, hunker down for the winter, and then we won't see them again until spring. So this is a very secretive turtle. I imagine a lot of people here tonight have seen turtles of some sort sunning themselves on a rock or a log, offshore from a lake or a pond. You can see those turtles from hundreds of feet away, or even with binoculars. Sometimes wood turtles do that, but usually this is how wood turtles bask, which is they wedge themselves in some vegetation with just part of their butt sticking out. And that makes a lot of sense for a turtle that spends time away from water. So using those painted turtles as an example, they're sunning themselves on a log above open water. If a predator comes, all they have to do to escape is let go and sink. But if you're a wood turtle and you're 400 feet away from water and a predator comes and it sees you, that predator has you. And maybe the shell can protect you, but if you're small or if the predator is large, it can't. So instead, their number one defense when they're sunning themselves is just to avoid being seen. So here is where we have a wood turtle basking. And this is pretty typical. Here's another example of a wood turtle sunning itself. And you have to get really in there and look closely to see that there is actually a turtle in the brush, in the brambles around that dead tree. And it's warm down there. This turtle is actively getting warmer. But what I'm getting at here is if you're in a place that is one of the few areas that's really good for wood turtles and they're somewhat common, there's a good chance you're not going to know that they're there, even if you pass within a few feet of them. These turtles can be very difficult to see unless you happen to see them when they're moving, like the spotted turtle, from point A to point B. And it just happens to be like open exposed habitat along their path of travel. But they're very good at not being seen. Here's a wood turtle that was almost out in the open. I was hanging out with some people talking about habitat restoration. We were standing around this turtle for almost 10 minutes before I noticed that it was in the leaf litter looking up at us. And it's, again, just totally normal for these turtles. As a result, when I'm talking with landowners, trying to get permission to do a survey on their property or chat about habitat restoration, I hear things like this a lot. And this is a farmer that I know pretty well now. I see him every spring. But the first time I met him, he said something along the lines of, well, you know, I've lived here for over 50 years, and if there were orange-legged turtles in my fields, I'd know about it. About half an hour after he said this to me, we'd already found 3 or 4 wood turtles along his stream bank, really close to his cattle crossing too. And this is what he had to say. For those of you here that aren't fluent in dairy speak, this loosely translates to, I'm very surprised by this. All right. Nesting habitat, very critical thing for any turtle. Wood turtles have a pretty predictable type of nesting habitat they prefer, which is really just prominent sand or gravel bars on the banks of a stream. If possible, they prefer not to travel very far from water to lay their eggs. Snapping turtles have been known to move over a mile away from water to lay their eggs. But if a sandbar is available right on the banks of the river, that is where most of the turtles will lay their eggs. If that habitat feature is not available, or if it's been overrun by invasive vegetation, such as Japanese knotweed, which we'll talk about a little more in a few minutes, then those turtles have to find another spot to lay their eggs. And that spot could put the female at risk if it's, say, for example, a cornfield or a backyard garden, or worse yet, the edge of a busy highway. Those are the sorts of places a wood turtle might lay their eggs that they don't have access to a good sandbar. When they do lay their eggs, maybe 4 to 12 eggs, and the survival rate of those nests and of the young will be very low. So this is just a cool video. I want to show you what you'll be looking at here are 3 female wood turtles looking for a good place to lay their eggs at a site that has since been opened up and is being managed specifically for as a wood turtle nest site. Each frame represents 1 minute. This is a game camera on a time-lapse photo. And as it turns out here, at this site, 90% of the turtles in the floodplain were going to this one spot to lay their eggs. They take their sweet time looking for just the right spot. Here we have in the middle, she starts digging a hole. A lot of times they don't like the first hole they dig and they'll abandon it. There she goes. She didn't like it. We call those unofficially test holes, but here she settles down, the butt waggling back and forth. She's digging. She will eventually lay her eggs there. Everything eats baby turtles. So these turtles or the eggs typically would be laid in late spring, early summer, and then they'll hatch late August, September, sometimes as late as early October, but September is when most of these eggs will actually hatch out. But pretty much everything eats baby turtles. Raccoons, skunks, and foxes are the usual suspects, but even smaller things, crows and chipmunks will also take baby turtles. I think of them as like little savory Oreos scuttling about the landscape. If it's an animal that eats protein as a big part of its diet, or even a small part, they will eat a baby turtle. It's not until they get a few years old and then their shell begins to harden that they become protected from some, or eventually most predators. What does the wood turtle eat? This is another opportunistic omnivore. And their diets change a little bit as they age. So the young turtles are mostly eating invertebrates or anything dead they can find. crustaceans, insects, earthworms, snails are a huge part of their diet. And as they get bigger, their diet shifts more and more towards vegetation. They'll still eat snail slugs or any of those other things that a juvenile will eat, but now the bulk of their diet is like leafy greens or fruits, just plants. Something that's really cool about wood turtles, and this is true for spotted turtles as well, is that as they grow, they develop growth rings on their shell. So each of these armored plates on their shell is called a scute, and they'll develop an annual growth ring on those scutes as they mature. So looking in the middle here, we have right here, this is the shell that they hatched with, and then each ring outward will be another year. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 or so years old. However, they only grow for about 20 years, and they can live quite a bit longer than that. And if they're not growing, they're not developing growth rings. However, once they stop growing, their shells also start to wear down and become polished. So over time, as that wear and tear accumulates, you can use that to very roughly estimate the age of these turtles. This one has no evidence that he ever had growth rings on his shell. His shell is polished as smooth as marble. And it's impossible to know on a turtle by turtle basis exactly how old he is. But we know from a couple studies that level of wear on the shell correlates roughly to about 80 years of age. And there's good reason to believe they can live quite a bit longer than that. How long have we actually verified their age in the wild? Only about 55 years as a minimum. Those 55-year-old turtles were caught originally when they were young. Actually they weren't. They were older turtles, but they were given a minimum age of 20, because that's, if they were less than 20, they could be aged precisely, and then someone recaptured them 35 years later. So add those two numbers together, that gets you 55 as a minimum. But those original turtles were full-grown adults. Blanding's turtles, which are so closely related to wood turtles that they hybridize in captivity, have been confirmed at 88 years in the wild. And box turtles, another one that you have living in the area, have been confirmed at over 100 in the wild. These turtles basically live until something kills them. And once they get past that hatchling stage, their odds of survival from year to year are very high, except in places where there's a lot of disturbance and cars and tractors overlapping with their habitat. So I would not be here talking to you tonight if everything was fine with wood turtle populations. There's a lot of things working against them. And just to name a few of the biggest concerns: riverbank and floodplain disturbance. A really big part of that would be mowing within 300 feet of wood turtle streams, especially farm fields. Roadkill is problematic. There's that black market that I referenced earlier. Sometimes when people find turtles on trails or crossing roads, they bring them home as pets, or they release them somewhere else, perhaps a pond at the other end of town, and that turtle has no idea how to get back to suitable wood turtle habitat. Direct habitat loss and development is taking available habitat away from turtles. Invasive plants, knotweed is my main concern for wood turtles, just because of how good it is at overrunning floodplains and crowding out or shading out nest sites. And then even recreation in sensitive habitat can be a concern. If there are just a lot of people near nest sites or near areas where a lot of the turtles are overwintering and they can then see them more easily in the spring, that's a concern. And the concern is people taking turtles home. Getting into some more specifics with a few of those threats, this is an example of what I consider really good former wood turtle habitat. There's nothing wrong with the stream itself. There are wood turtles nearby. But what does the floodplain look like? It's farm fields and a busy highway. And because wood turtles are spending so much time on land, ranging over 300 or up to 1,000 feet from water, yo-yoing back and forth to the stream and between the stream and uplands throughout the year, they're spending a lot of time in these farm fields or crossing a busy highway. And it doesn't take much of these turtles getting killed by cars and machinery to really tip the scales. So this turtle I had a picture of up a moment ago, if we take a closer look, you might notice that she's missing her left front foot. She was missing her left front foot when I found her, and who knows why. Raccoons are often the culprit. I've tracked her for a few years using radio telemetry, And during that time, she was nicked by some hang equipment and lost a few edges off the edge of her shell above her front right leg. And since then, she's actually been nicked by a tractor one more time and lost a little bit of another part of her shell. Yeah, not good. She's using very risky habitat. This is another turtle that I know pretty well. She is alive. There's a turtle in here. She has a 5-inch gash in the back of her shell. This turtle could be 60 years old, and that gash in her shell could be decades old. I have no idea. But she survived that injury, and she continues to lay eggs. She's a pretty healthy turtle. Also continues to use really risky habitat. But these two turtles were very lucky. Looking at like where is this danger zone in agricultural settings. So I showed you the same map earlier, but we've added this white area, which is where most of the turtles are going to spend the bulk of their time. So in the floodplain, within that 300-foot zone, and the edges of fields. Some will go into the core of the fields out to that 300-foot blue line, but the edges are what they like the best, which means we have what I think of as like the highest danger zone, where these turtles are at the greatest risk of getting injured or killed by farming equipment. Shifting to roads, I do want to give you the heads up. The next slide does show 2 dead turtles, so you can avert your eyes for just a moment if you do not wish to see that. These are the first 2 wood turtles that I found near my home on a busy highway. And since then, I've found a few more also dead on the highway, a couple living, but over half not alive. And looking at how much loss can these populations take, if you take your average wood turtle stream or section of habitat that has about we'll say 100 adult turtles, that'd be a really healthy population. All it takes is losing about one of those turtles per year to human causes to start seeing population decline within 75 years. Maybe half, like 50% decline. Losing 2 per year can lead to localized extinction in 75 years. 3 per year escalates that process. And that's not just roadkill, that's also the farm fields, turtles getting killed by people's dogs, turtles being taken away from the population by poachers or by people just bringing them home as pets. That's all the human causes put together. So 1 or 2 turtles per year, not very many. Predators such as raccoons are another threat. Raccoons are, of course, a native species. They're supposed to be here. But when raccoons are found near human land use, residential areas, commercial areas, farm fields, their numbers explode. These raccoons might be getting fat off of garbage, and at the end of the day, they're still wild animals and they still eat their natural foods. In some areas, raccoons eat almost 100% of wood turtle nests, or the nests of the other turtles that we've talked about so far tonight. And while a raccoon probably wouldn't be able to kill an adult wood turtle, they have very dexterous, grabby paws. And if they're determined, they might be able to pull a leg out and chew on the foot for a little bit. And it turns out to be very common that we find wood turtles that are missing 1 or more legs. This is a turtle that my technician found this spring, missing her left front leg, also missing an eye. If you were to average out limblessness in wood turtle populations across all the studies that have ever been done, it's between 12 and 20% of wood turtles are missing at least 1 leg. And I've seen multiple wood turtles that are missing both of their front legs, and they just have like an elbow essentially, which is enough to get them up and over objects. But at that point, they're not leaving the water anymore. Their odds of survival are quite a bit lower. But a 3-legged wood turtle, their odds are pretty good. If they survive the injury and it doesn't get really horribly infected, they will keep trucking and live a pretty normal wood turtle life. Japanese knotweed, which I mentioned a couple times. This is the invasive plant I'm most concerned about. This is just an example of how knotweed can overrun a floodplain. And this site historically was good for wood turtle nesting. Now it isn't. So unless someone does something about this knotweed, the turtles have to go elsewhere to lay their eggs. And if that elsewhere is roads, farm fields, or someone's backyard, it elevates the risk for the females, which are also the most important turtles to their populations, those adult females. The loss of a single adult female can be a really big deal. It takes a lot of work for the population to replace adults, and it's the females that are doing that work. And eradicating knotweed in most settings, virtually impossible. But by targeting those eradication efforts to turtle nesting habitat, you can have tangible results very quickly. And as long as someone's keeping their eye on it and maintaining that over time. Cows, yeah, sure, a cow could step on a wood turtle and might injure it, but by and large, cows are not killing adult wood turtles. What they are doing, if the cows have access to a stream, is really messing up the water quality. They're trampling the stream banks, they're causing erosion, they're walking all over nest sites, and they're pooping in the river, which all combined can make things much less suitable for wood turtles, which they really do depend on having clean water. The black market, which I touched on briefly. This is just a random screenshot I took a while back of some recent headlines of turtle trafficking in the news. I think most people, when you think of wildlife trafficking, it's like African wildlife, rhino horns, elephant ivory, jungle primates. That's what we think of. But by and large, like taking a look at the whole world, where is wildlife trafficking the most problematic? More animals are being exported illegally from North America than anywhere else in the world. A large percent of those animals are reptiles. I think it's over half of those are reptiles, and most of those reptiles are rare turtles. So this is a very big problem. And so, as I said, losing 1 or 2 turtles from a population per year causes decline. A single poacher that knows what they're doing and goes at the right time could pull 20 wood turtles out of a stream in a single day. That is irreversible harm. So we need to be very careful about making sure that those spots where wood turtles occur, those hot spots, the critical habitat, those locations need to be kept secret. Share them with conservation organizations or your state wildlife agency, but don't blab about what stream these turtles came from on Facebook or Instagram. It's permanent damage if the wrong person finds out. Right, I just said that. So what can we actually do to restore habitat for wood turtles? A lot of the conservation work that we're doing really revolves around minimizing vehicle access to that 300-foot zone around good wood turtle streams. Riparian buffers, those would be strips of land planted with the shrubs between streams and human land use. Those are a very big part of wood turtle conservation. The official recommended number would be a 300-foot buffer. That's almost unachievable in most agricultural settings. But my way of thinking about it is any buffer is better than none, and bigger the better. Many conservation organizations, if they're planting buffers, they shoot for about 35 feet as a minimum. And if that's all you can get, great. That is a huge step in the right direction for wood turtles. But if you're at a good spot for wood turtles, having those turtles there is a really good reason to push for a wider buffer. Likewise, I think of buffers a little differently sometimes. So there's that first zone, that 35 feet, where it's very important to just keep vehicles out of there. But then beyond that 35 feet, we could actually achieve what is a 300-foot buffer for a wood turtle, but outside of what was planted, that shrubby zone, that could be a farm field that has livestock in it. As long as the buffer is wide enough to protect water quality, there are agricultural practices that are perfectly compatible with wood turtles. But yeah, haying in the floodplain really is risky for these animals. That being said, like I buy hay to feed my goats. I buy hay from farmers that work in floodplains. Like I don't mean to make it sound like this is an evil practice, but it is a big source of concern for wood turtles. Managing invasive plants, especially knotweed on nesting sites, restoring nesting habitat, or even sometimes building nest sites, as long as it's done in a safe area away from roads, that can be hugely helpful. And then for recreation planning, it can be hard to move a trail once it's there, but when new trails are being constructed, keeping them away from sensitive habitat like those nest sites or known hibernation areas would be important. Or in some cases, rerouting ATV trails can be recommended, but that just gets really difficult to accomplish. Thankfully, there are financial incentives for landowners, especially farmers, to set aside some habitat for certain turtles. The USDA and Natural Resources Conservation Service has this program called Working Lands for Wildlife. And as part of that, they have a Northeast turtles program. Those 4 species I mentioned, wood-spotted, bog, and blandings, they are the focal species for this Working Lands for Wildlife program. And through Farm Bill and other USDA conservation programs, landowners can basically be given payments to take land out of production. This map on the right is an example of a buffer proposal for a landowner I'm working with, where they will get annual rental payments to compensate them for the hay that they're not selling in this sensitive habitat along the stream. Hugely important programs. In the absence of those financial incentives, a lot less would be being done to restore wood turtle habitat. All right, what are some examples of the sorts of work that the Orianne Society is doing right now? To date, we've done, this number needs to be updated. It's over 500 surveys to assess wood turtle populations and look for where's that most critical habitat, the highest priorities for habitat restoration. We've done a number of different types of population monitoring projects to look for site-specific threats in those high priority areas. Like radio telemetry, for example, we can use trackers in the back of the turtle to follow them around the landscape and figure out how are they using the land, where are they going, how do they get from point A to point B, what threats do they encounter. One really exciting project I'm working on right now is with the Vermont Transportation Department. They're replacing some bridges and culverts that do not allow fish or turtles to move upstream. There are little waterfalls under the culverts, and there's a bridge built over a waterfall, but the new structures being put in will be wildlife friendly. We're helping ensure that these new structures are also very turtle friendly. And we're using GPS transmitters to track turtles and get locations, multiple locations per day without ever needing to bother the turtles throughout the summer, to figure out where are they crossing the road? Where does it make sense to put some fencing up to keep them off of the road or redirect them toward a bridge? We're working on a project in the Connecticut River Valley with the Connecticut River Conservancy, doing outreach to landowners in high priority wood turtle areas to try to convince people to enroll in those Farm Bill conservation programs to set those buffers up and hopefully get those financial incentives. And we do a lot of consultation with like state and federal government agencies, nonprofit partners, to try to find ways to weave wood turtle conservation into other conservation projects that are ongoing. New York, in the Hudson Valley, this is an area that until recently really hasn't had a lot of wood turtle monitoring. We couldn't point at a map and say, where are those high priority places to target wood turtle conservation? So to help fill in that knowledge gap, last year, we started doing widespread turtle surveys in the lower valley, focused on wood turtles. We were able to do 65 surveys last year and found about 121 turtles. Most of those turtles were just at a few sites. So right off the bat, that gets me thinking about which areas are the most important. Where do we want to target conservation work? We identified one watershed that has really piqued my interest, where we'll take a closer look this year. We'll continue with those surveys, trying to get to new areas a little farther north next year. And it looks like we'll also be using that GPS monitoring technology to track turtles at 2 farms in that potentially high priority setting that we found last year. Try to figure out how are they using the farm fields, where can we really target habitat restoration. When we're doing wood turtle surveys, like what do those surveys look like? Really, it's a pretty simple methodology. We walk 1 kilometer sections of stream bank to visually scan for wood turtles. We'll try to capture any wood turtle that we find, to measure them, weigh them, collect reference photos, assess their overall health. And we'll also file a very shallow groove around the edge of their shell. The material is made out of keratin, like our fingernails. But those markings allow us to permanently identify individual turtles, which is really helpful for later, over time, estimating population size. On the left here is a photograph of my technician, one of my techs this spring, measuring a turtle. And on the right is the system that we use for notching turtles. So these little armored plates around the edge of the shell, marginal scutes is what they're called, have numbers that correspond to them. And depending on where we put those notches, that gives the turtle a unique code. So if a turtle received notches on number 2, 4, and 70, we would just add those numbers together. That is turtle number 76. Using the system, we can come up with unique combinations for any number between 1 and over 10,000, just by using 3 or 4 notches on the turtle, and they are pretty shallow. It doesn't affect the turtles in any way. Now, I'll be closing here in a few minutes, but I want to show you some examples of the sort of information that we get from that GPS monitoring technology. So I could never get this much data using radio telemetry, where you have to actually go out and follow the turtles and find them, like visually find them using the tracker to know where they are. GPS, those locations are being automatically recorded, so we can get a lot more data without needing to bug the turtle twice a week and disturb its habitat or disturb its behavior or leave a bunch of human stink behind that attracts predators. It's sort of like we catch the turtle once, put a small device on its back, and then it's hands off from there. So in this case, we're getting a location every 4 hours. On the left is a female who she made a lengthier trip to go lay her eggs, but this is her entire summer area, from one end to the other, about 2/10 of a mile. So not a huge area. A lot of that is in upland habitat or in a floodplain, a little bit in the river. On the right is a similar overall area. This turtle had like 3 different areas that it was bouncing back and forth between. And it spent like most of the spring living under a guardrail along that busy road, which made me really nervous. But there's no point in moving her. She would just go right back. These are creatures of habit with very strong spatial instincts. So these are 2 turtles that didn't go very far. Here are a couple turtles that went really far. So on the left is another female. So she started up here, spent most of 1 year in the habitat sort of at the north of this image. And then this year, she did the same thing, and then I lost her for a while. I couldn't find her. I had no idea where she was, but that GPS kept recording locations. And when I got that data, eventually, I found her on the river on the other side of the road. Now, if this was just radio telemetry, I would think, okay, she started up over here, and then she went under the road, or in this case, she'd have to go over and just follow the stream. I downloaded the GPS data, and that is not what she did. She spent months way out in the woods, away from water, just trekking through the forest in upland habitat, crossed the road, reconnected to the stream, and then headed back north, and never got back where she started. This one on the right, a male who just throughout the whole year, he just kept moving. A lot of that movement was over land, some of it in the stream, but by and large, both these turtles, they covered their distance on land, not in the water. And from one end to the other, 3 miles. I had a turtle this year that also disappeared for a while. He's one that was hit by a car a couple years ago, and I've just been casually keeping up with him using radio telemetry just to make sure that there are no complications with his recovery. But he disappeared last fall. I figured, okay, well, either the transmitter died or maybe he got hit by a car again. Who knows? But then someone sent me an email because they found this turtle in some random location with a tracker on its back and a crack in its shell. And sure enough, it was the same turtle, and it had moved 21 miles. Did that turtle get there on its own? I have no idea. But they have been confirmed moving 10 to 15 miles on their own. And if they can do that, there's no reason to think that 21 miles is out of the realm of possibility. Just mind-blowing. My point here is that it's really easy to get hung up on managing a specific property for wood turtles, or fixing this one stream bank, or setting up one riparian buffer. But to conserve a population of wood turtles really requires looking at things through a landscape level approach that takes into account these widespread movements. It's not every turtle traveling these great distances, but it's a decent proportion of the population that are really moving around. And more than that, like, how do we approach wood turtle conservation? If someone gave me $5 million and said, go fix Hudson Valley wood turtle habitat, if I spread that $5 million across like every sub-basin in the Hudson Valley, all the way from like the Westchester County up to Albany, it's possible that I could not actually improve the prospects for a single wood turtle population long term. They would all still be declining, and none of those populations have everything that they need. But by targeting that same amount of money to a more refined area, a specific watershed, this 3-mile section of river and the surrounding landscape that is of higher priority to wood turtles, you can lock that population in, really secure their future. But right now, just because of the limited data for the Hudson Valley, we don't know where those high priority sites are right now. Like, we found one last year, there are others. But getting that baseline data by doing those population surveys is really the first step into figuring out where are the hot spots, where are the most critical places to target these conservation resources. And wrapping things up here, I like this photo because it really demonstrates that wood turtles are a species that tie land and water together. I'm interested in turtles because I really like turtles, but wood turtle habitat restoration accomplishes so much more than helping wood turtles. Any animal that uses floodplain environments or travels along river corridors is going to benefit from wood turtle conservation. Water quality is going to improve. This helps fisheries. It helps recreational opportunities. It reduces the likelihood of toxic algal blooms in lakes where there are just massive water quality issues. That affects humans directly in many, many different ways. So this isn't a wood turtle thing. Wood turtles are this flagship species that people care about once they learn about them. And by folding a conservation program around an animal like a wood turtle, you can accomplish so much more. And when landowners do learn about the turtles on their property, as I said earlier, it's not obvious that wood turtles are around, even if they're common. They're just such an endearing animal. It changes people's lives. These kids followed me around for a survey. They asked a ton of great questions. You never know if having this sort of interaction with landowners is going to, raise that next generation of turtle conservation biologists, or, this farmer, their mother, by having her kids involved. I heard later they were talking about this for weeks. And that keeps wood turtles in the farmer's mind too. They're the ones that are going to make the decisions on management about habitat restoration. So doing this sort of outreach and getting people to care about wood turtles or the other turtles we're talking about, hugely important. So I'm going to wrap things up there. These were two mini versions of presentations I could give a lot more detail about, but we have only so much time, and brains can only absorb so much information within that time, that this is a good place to stop.
All right, thanks a lot, Kiley. It was a great presentation. We can open up for questions. I have one for now. I'm wondering if there are any turtle hatcheries, or if there's any way that somebody could start a hatchery for these turtles.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one conservation technique that people use is called head starting. So because nest survival can be really low, especially where there are a lot of raccoons, and hatchling survival is low, by rearing nests in captivity and then keeping those young in captivity through their first winter and power feeding them, essentially, they can be released the following spring at an age of about 6 months, and they'll be the size of a 3 or 4-year-old turtle, which gets them past that critical stage where anything can eat them. That said, head starting is one of those really attractive ideas that people get really excited about, and it is a very valuable tool for conservation. But first and foremost, for wood turtles, I would prioritize the threats that are killing adult turtles. Like, that's the higher priority, is what's killing the adult turtles. Address that first. And if someone else has the resources or time or resources to do a Head Start program, that's terrific. But if the money is being spent on head starting instead of protecting the adult turtles, that money might be going to the wrong place, and might not be the wisest use of resources. But there are cases where the number one threat is the lack of juvenile and nest survival. There's a Blandings turtle site down in Dutchess County where the adult survival is decent, the nesting habitat is being managed appropriately, and raccoons left to their own devices would eat every single nest and juvenile turtle. So head starting is a huge part of that program. And there are cases where head starting is what's being used for wood turtles as well. It's not something I'm personally involved with at this point, but it could be down the road for us.
There's a bunch of questions in the chat, but some people are asking for your contact information, which is on this current slide. So let's hold it up for a while. It's in the upper left. But somebody asks for a link to the turtle conservation funding available to make a buffer around a stream or along farm fields.
Sorry, I'm recovering from COVID and was blowing my nose. Can you repeat that?
Somebody wants to know if you can provide a link to the turtle conservation funding available to make a buffer around a stream or along farm fields. I'm
Yeah,
hoping.
so it would take a moment to put a link up here, but a lot of that funding is through Farm Bill conservation programs, which would be administered by your local USDA office. And my understanding is in the valley, these turtles might not be at the forefront of the Natural Resources Conservation Service and USDA's mind. But that is where the money would be coming from, Farm Bill conservation programs. Or there are some other programs. I'm not going to remember what the acronym stands for, but one of them is PRISM in southeastern New York that has resources for managing invasive vegetation on private lands. And I should say those Farm Bill programs are really focused on working lands, like actual farms. Private property that isn't part of a farm wouldn't qualify for those financial incentives, but there are other programs that could at least fund the work. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, through their Partners program, does a lot of work like that. I'm less familiar with how much turtle work they're doing in the Hudson Valley, but very close partners of ours in New England, at least.
Any other questions?
There's still a whole bunch of questions in the chat.
Let's see here. Yeah. How do you, let's see, does Phragmites hurt wood turtle habitat?
Yeah, so Phragmites, I've heard that called bamboo and a few other names. Invasive grass that gets really, really tall, like 10 feet plus, can definitely overrun wetland habitats. Sometimes even like floodplains along wood turtle streams. It can impact them by just crowding out. They get crowded out essentially. The Phragmites can also limit the wood turtle's ability to sun itself. Almost nothing is going to grow under the Phragmites, so the vegetation the turtle actually can eat isn't going to live underneath the dense Phragmites patch. Phragmites has a much larger impact, though, on the other turtles that we're interested in. So bog turtles, which live in, well, small bogs, very shallow wetlands. Their entire habitat could be overrun with Phragmites, and spotted turtles as well. I think Phragmites is a bigger threat to those two species than it is to the wood turtle, but certainly a concern.
Another question. Another question is, do wood turtles eat ticks?
I don't see why they wouldn't if they found a tick moving, especially if we're talking about a very small turtle, but I'm not aware of anyone documenting that. Wouldn't be surprising, but we just haven't seen it with our own eyes. Nobody has, as far as I'm aware. I've seen turtles with ticks on them, but a little different.
So if we're going to look for turtle habitat, we're going to probably look for sandy banks on streams. Sandy banks is where they're going to lay their eggs.
Yep, meandering streams with those sand and gravel bars on the banks.
Another question: is there a way to protect turtle nests before predators come along to eat the eggs?
Yeah, so similar to head starting, caging a nest can protect the eggs themselves from predation. There are a few ways that people do it. It does require a permit to do this sort of thing because you are confining a nest. But basically, like welded wire mesh formed into like a cylinder and then placed over the nest with something weighting it down. The challenging thing is, in order to do that, you actually have to see the turtle laying the eggs. Otherwise, you have no idea where the nests are. That's true for head starting efforts as well. And those cages can be designed a couple ways. Some will have little doors that the turtles can get out of, but the predators can't get their paws through. But if the purpose is to clutch the hatchlings for a head starting program, then you wouldn't want a door. but that cage during that season where the eggs could be hatching would need to be checked every day, sometimes twice a day. Otherwise, if those turtles hatch and they come out, they could get cooked by the sun and like die within a day during certain conditions. So those are reasons why it's something that you need a permit to do.
Somebody asked the question actually that I was going to ask. If I see a turtle in the wild, but in a dangerous situation, say near a roadway, is
Yep.
it safe to pick it up and move it?
Yeah, that's one of the easiest things that people can do to help turtles, especially since roads are such a big threat. When you see any turtle crossing a road, if it is safe for you to do so, go ahead and help that turtle across the road in whichever direction it was headed. Turtles are very headstrong animals, and they really don't end up places by accident unless a person moves them. So sometimes you might find a turtle crossing a road and it looks like it's headed toward bad habitat. It's tempting to turn that turtle around and send it in the other direction. But there's a more than 50% chance that turtle is then going to turn back around and cross the road a second time. So whatever direction it's headed, unless it's headed to like a really busy shopping plaza or it's in the middle of a highway with like a concrete barrier in the middle, then you want to turn that turtle around. But if it can cross the road, it's 9.5 or even more times out of 10. Best thing to do is just send it in whatever direction it was headed.
And is there a best way to pick up the turtle?
Yeah. Don't put your fingers near their face. Most turtles, they're not going to reach their heads very far, but if you're just holding them by the shell, either like your hands around, like, holding it by where its ribs would be, or a hand under the shell behind the turtle, pick it up by the butt. It might try to kick or scratch your hand, but it can't really do much to you. Wood turtles almost never bite, but if they do, any turtle is capable of they'll make sure you remember the bite. Their jaws are kind of like a cross between pliers and razor blades. And when they do bite, sometimes they don't let go. But yeah, the butt is a safe place to hold the turtle. Really big snapping turtles, same thing, but sometimes they're simply too large for many people to carry. So I've seen people do some creative things like keep a snow shovel in their back of their car so they can just sort of like use the shovel like a plow and push the turtle off the road, or take the floor mat out of your car, put it on the road, grab the turtle from behind and kind of like drag it onto the floor mat and then drag the floor mat across the road. There are lots of creative ways you can help a big snapper, but bottom line is for some people that might be a little too much turtle. And
But don't
they are
pick them
called
up by
snapping
the
turtles
tail.
for a reason. Thank you.
Don't pick them up
And
by the
big
tail.
snappers, you'll see people pick them up by the tail sometimes. It can injure the turtles. I've heard of people doing that and like hearing the vertebrae pop because they're so heavy. But if you're capable of grabbing a snapping turtle by its tail, you're equally capable of grabbing it by the hind feet. And it is okay to pick them up by both of their back legs. Very, very powerful legs. So just as good as the tail, but a lot less dangerous to the turtle.
All right, thank you. So, any other questions?
Well, there was another question and a comment. Judith Karpova pointed out that you mentioned the USDA Farm Bill Conservation Program.
Yep.
But she also mentioned something called PRISM for addressing.
Yeah. Yep.
plants.
So that was, I think I might have mentioned that with the when someone asked about what the programs are, but yeah, that's one of the programs that can do invasive plant management on private properties, and you don't have to be a farm to qualify for funding through that program.
And then Helena asks, where would you get the permit to protect the hatchlings? Sounds like
yeah, so that is something that the New York Department of Environmental Conservation oversees all permitting for reptiles and amphibians. I'm not aware I don't know in New York if they've ever issued permits to individuals apart from like wildlife rehabbers. But like conservation organizations or like a conservation commission or like a local nonprofit, they would be the organization that would be more likely to be granted a permit. But then they could designate sub-permittees or authorize individuals under that permit. In Vermont, I know there are examples of private individuals getting their own permits for work, but I'm just not certain in New York if there's a precedent for that. But it would be through the New York Department of Environmental Conservation.
All right.
Unless they get listed as a federally threatened species, because then there's this whole federal permitting part of the equation.
Which makes it more complicated, right?
Yeah, no, there are, I think that sort of move, by and large, would be a very good thing for wood turtles, but you know, does add an extra level of regulatory oversight to anything that happens with the species, for a good reason, but it can make things harder for you know, an individual to you know, get that authorization.
So one last question. If one of us happens to spot one of these 4 turtles, should we drop you an email? Are you still
Yeah.
in them?
Yep. Please do. So this is again New York DEC. They have a database where they track, you know, all sorts of mostly threatened and endangered wildlife. But if you were to get a report to me or to your local DEC biologist, you know, that information would eventually make its way to a database where all of this information is stored. And hugely helpful when, for example, there's like a development proposal that could impact wood turtle habitat. If there's never been a report from that area, no one is going to raise wood turtles as a species of concern to maybe amend the project around, you know, during that permit review process. But yeah, easiest thing, probably just email me. I will get that information in the right spot. But if you don't write down my email or you lose it, New York DEC, you will always have a DEC biologist in your region that you can contact. It is a permanent part of your lives.